Hello, folks. Welcome to the 2024 Vermont Specialty Crop Block Grant Program webinar. This webinar is being recorded. I am just going to open up our PowerPoint slide and we'll dive right in. Okay. So like I said, this is the webinar for the 2024 Vermont Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. We're going to take today and we're going to go over all of the information you need to know in order to have a successful application for the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. So, like I said, we're going to provide a brief overview of the program. If folks join us, please raise your hand function to ask a question or share ideas. Ideally, you would stick that in the chat. I'm doing this solo today, so if someone has a question, please put it in the chat and we'll be able to get to it at the end. I am not able to see the chat right now, so just so you know, if you do have a question and it's time sensitive, you can go ahead and unmute and ask away. So first, some basics about the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. This is a federally funded program that was authorized by the Farm Bills in 2004, 14, and 18. And the 2018 Farm Bill has been extended for another year, so that covers both this year and next year, I believe. The program is administered by the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service, and the block grant part of Specialty Crop Block Grant Program is an annual award that is granted to all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and U.S. territories. Essentially, they identify how much, using a system, how much each state, territory, etc., will receive, and then we are given significant flexibility on how to use the funds. So the overall purpose of this program and these funds is to enhance the competitiveness of U.S. specialty crops. So let's briefly elaborate on that purpose. First, what is a specialty crop? This is a really good question that a lot of people have. Essentially, quite a few items that we grow and produce here in Vermont fall under specialty crop. Specialty crops are defined in the U.S. statute, so by the USDA, as fruits and vegetables, tree nuts, dried fruits, horticulture, and nursery crops, which includes floriculture. So that definition does include hops, honey, maple, mushrooms, and Christmas trees. It also includes things like wine and cider or other processed specialty products, as long as they're made of more than 50% specialty crops. It includes cut flowers. It includes pretty much anything you can think of that isn't a feed-based grain or wheat. So no wheats, grains, feed corn, that sort of thing. Sweet corn, however, does fall under it. So it can be a little bit of a fuzzy area, but for the most part, just think of all fruits and vegetables, tree nuts, horticulture, nursery crops, as well as that honey, maple, Christmas trees, etc. So what can this funding be used for? So like I said, the purpose of these funds from the USDA's perspective is to enhance the competitiveness of U.S. specialty crops through marketing promotion, research and development, availability and access, and local, regional, and national challenges by addressing those challenges for producers. So this program can fund projects with many different purposes and goals, as long as they address these areas. So they're leveraging efforts to market and promote these crops. They're assisting producers with research and development that are relevant to the specialty crop program, expanding availability and access to specialty crops by consumers, and then, of course, again, addressing those challenges. What is a project? So this is sort of getting into what an actual application might look like. So essentially, a project as defined by the USDA, a project is something that you would actually apply to complete, which is what the funds that you will apply for. So a project is a set of interrelated tasks with a cohesive, distinct, specified, and defined goal. So it follows a planned, organized approach over a fixed period of time and within specific limitations such as cost, quality, performance measures, etc. Additionally, it uses resources that are specifically allocated to the work of the project and usually involves a team of people. Projects are different from other ongoing operations in an organization because, unlike operations, projects have a definitive beginning and end, so they have a limited duration. A project has an overarching goal that the applicant wants to accomplish through a series of individual activities or tasks, and they want to do that within a specific start and end date. So, example of a project would mean researching a new cultivar, providing outreach opportunities on specialty crops to youth, families, seniors, communities, that sort of thing. Maybe marketing apples through a targeted promotional campaign. And other sort of discrete, distinct finish and projects with a beginning and an end. It does not include things like ongoing initiatives that are just part of your organization or operations goals. It wouldn't be day-to-day tasks that are typical for the organization that you're working for, but it would be something that is specific, has specific goals, has a beginning and an end, and involves planning along certain certain objectives and quality and quantitative measurements. So activities that could fall under projects would include hiring personnel, purchasing equipment, holding an educational workshop, planting specialty crops, distributing promotional materials. It could involve setting up new systems. It could involve developing those new promotional materials or developing a new program. So a little bit about the Vermont Specialty Crop Block Grant Program specifically. Like I said, this is the block program that goes to each individual state. So each individual state has its own process, and here is ours. So in 2024, we'll be awarding around $200,000. This is our typical amount that we award through the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. Any entity may apply. So that means nonprofits, that means cooperatives, that means business associations, etc. It also means research institutions, schools. It can mean producers, but all projects, and this is one of the most important parts, all projects must benefit multiple producers. So an individual single producer cannot apply for this. They would have to be working in concert with a producer association, with multiple other producers, with researchers, something like that. There is a match or cost share that's required. It's 50% of the request. We'll go into that a little bit more, but there is a cost share. It should address an issue, problem, or need that is specific to specialty crop producers. It should demonstrate outreach, communication, and partnership with producers. It can't be in a silo. There has to be some communication with producers and justification with partners for what you're doing. And then the pre-application is due January 14th, 2024. So it's open right now. We'll go into that a little bit more too. So first, some quick facts, just kind of a smooth overview. So eligibility, any entity can apply, but like I said, all funded projects must benefit more than one specialty crop business. Projects to establish or expand a single specialty crop business are not eligible. So individual farms are encouraged to collaborate and apply as a group. They can also, like I said, they can also partner with other growers, service providers, industry representatives, UVM Extension, Producers Association, that sort of thing. Over the past 5 years, we've been able to award around $200,000 each year. There's no minimum or maximum award, but in that same rolling 5 years, the average award was around $35,000, and the middle 50% of our awarded projects received between $20,000 and $45,000. So that gives you some good guardrails on where most of these projects land. That said, we've awarded everything from $4,000 to $57,000. And then project lengths. Multi-year projects are eligible and generally encouraged. They can run up to 2.5 years or around 30 months. And projects can begin on September 29th, 2024, which is a very specific day, but end of September, early October 2024 is typically the earliest a project can start. We do have some capacity to have pre-award costs covered, but that would be something that you would talk with me or with you would excuse me, you would talk about this with me before or during your application process. So just to touch on a couple of things, previously funded projects, so projects that have received a specialty crop block grant program grant in the past can be covered, but it cannot duplicate it directly. Still has to be a new project. So it has to have a new activity with a new start and end date. So it can't be repeating the same thing. So for example, if you were researching how pests affect a certain crop and your previous project was lab trials, you could move on to field trials or into education regarding that particular um, program or process you developed. That would be fine, but it cannot just be another continuation of lab trials. So you want to make sure you indicate how the project would complement the previous work and describe the likelihood that the project will become self-sustaining. So we're not looking at funding something that requires grant funds to sustain itself in perpetuity. So if this was something that you are trying to launch, a program that you're trying to launch, or an initiative that you're trying to launch that you would like to sustain itself, you're going to need to discuss like how do you make that program more self-sustainable, so it's not just a grant run program every year. So then there's also multi-state projects that address challenges and opportunities in 2 or more states. So we don't oversee the we, meaning the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, do not oversee the multi-state process, but the USDA does. So what you can do is you can apply for a specialty crop multi-state program grant, which is a different program entirely, and you're welcome to reach out to me with any questions about that. Or you can submit, if you're working with an entity in another state, you could submit applications to each state where organizations will serve as project partners. And so if you were collaborating with someone in Maine, you might apply for a Vermont Specialty Crop Block Grant Program and a Maine Specialty Crop Block Grant Program award. Okay, to go on a little bit more on the matching funds. So all proposals have to show matching funds equaling at least 50% of the grant request. So a proposal with a request of $10,000 must show a minimum of a $5,000 match. So that would be a $15,000 request overall. Those matching funds can be in kind or cash. And under limited circumstances, we may be able to reduce or waive it for specific projects. So that would be something that you would ask for during the application process. And you'd have to outline the impact of the project and indicate special circumstances that would justify consideration. The great thing about the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program is that matching funds can be really, really flexible. Basically, any kind of in-kind or cash contribution can be worked with. So it can be funds in the bank, funds contributed by another organization or through a grant or a loan. It can include applicant labor, compensation of employees, and that can even be current employees. So if you are working on a project, if you're a producer association and you're working on a project that would take up 20% of a staff member's time, a staff member that you already pay for, you could charge 20% applicant labor as an in-kind fund. Goods or services provided during the grant period are also considered. So contractors, consultants, supplies, volunteer labor, etc., that would be considered in kind as long as you're not expending it to the grant. The grant can't both pay for something and have it count as an in-kind match. It can also be covered by unrecovered indirect costs. So particularly if you are an institution or a larger nonprofit with high administrative costs. So say overhead, just general overhead, keeping the lights on, fringe benefits, etc. That is something that can be counted as a in-kind funds. Typically that falls toward large research institutions like UVM or another institution of that size. And then they can also be, they don't necessarily have to be directly related, or they don't have to be direct toward specialty crop, the actual specialty crop benefit. So let's see if I can explain this correctly. So they can be used to ensure that all the funds benefit specialty crops. So if your project might benefit non-specialty crops, that's okay as long as you have in-kind matching to basically offset where benefit might fall to non-specialty crops. So for example, if a project promotes specialty crops through marketing, agritourism, um, and 40% of the agritourism program is made up of farms that are, let's say, dairy and beef. So those are not specialty crops. But so 60% of the program participants are specialty crop producers, but 40% are not. If that 50% match can account for any benefit the non-specialty crop farms, the dairy and meat farms, could gain from the project. So basically, you're offsetting the expenses that would go toward marketing for that beef and dairy participants, and the specialty crop funds will only cover what is going toward actual specialty crop producers. Another example might be a matchmaking event for producers and buyers. So if 60% of the signups are produce growers and jam makers, and 40% are, again, dairy and beef producers, that match will cover the benefit of the project to the dairy and beef producers. You're just making sure that these federal USDA funds do not go to producers who are not specialty crop producers. They have other programs, and it's just not covered under the auspices of this particular program. It's okay if there's an ancillary benefit to other industries, but the sort of focus and thrust of the project must be focused on specialty crops. So eligible projects and ineligible projects. So like I said, any entity may apply, but projects must benefit more than one specialty crop business, individual, or organization. And you must be able to describe how your project will benefit and produce measurable outcomes for specialty crop industries rather than a single business, organization, or individual. We encourage individual businesses, organizations, or individuals to collaborate with other industry representatives, as well as fellow producers and organizations to ensure that each project will benefit multiple businesses. We do recommend gathering documented support from other stakeholders and producers. It does not have to be a direct partnership, but we will be asking during the application process for how you've engaged stakeholders and producers for your project, and how they support it and why they support this project. So if you're doing something for beekeepers, if you're doing a honey-based project, you might reach out to other beekeepers, the Vermont Beekeepers Association, other regional honey associations, and maybe even NOFA, something that's related to these stakeholders who are in that same space. You can also find a list of producer associations and their contact information on our website. I will be making these slides available alongside this recording, so you can go ahead and just click right on that, or you can write it down. Again, individual businesses can lead projects in partnership with UVM Extension or other partners. But again, projects that benefit a single business, organization, or individual are not eligible. The Vermont Specialty Crop Block Grant Program is not a business development grant, so it cannot be used to purchase land, to purchase equipment, to renovate an existing space. It really can't be used for construction at all. It's really more of a industry crop-focused promotional grant. Not strictly promotional activity. It can also include research, etc., but it is not for building an individual specialty crop business. So here's some good examples, sort of ineligible and eligible projects. So first, we have a specialty crop organization requests funds to promote its organization. That sounds good, but it's actually ineligible because the organization can promote a product, so Vermont apples, but not a specific organization like the Vermont Tree Fruit Growers Association. So, for example, the grant cannot cover branded merchandise that is just specific to an organization. So, for example, we couldn't make a Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets tote bag, but we could make a Vermont Specialty Crops tote bag, if that makes sense. An organization might request funds to conduct research on the feasibility of planting, cultivating, and growing a crop in a particular area and share that result with growers throughout the state. I gave it away, but yes, that's eligible. That's a perfect example of a project that would be covered under the Vermont Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. And it's important to note there that it's not just the research, but it's also sharing the results. So that education and outreach piece is critical for every single project. So all projects must have some sort of educational element involved. The next one, an organization requests funds to promote Vermont specialty crops to new markets, and access to those markets will benefit a variety of producers. That is absolutely eligible. This is the sort of thing where you might see an ancillary benefit to non-specialty crops, i.e. promoting Vermont specialty crops to new markets would just generally promote Vermont markets to those Vermont producers to those markets. That's okay. But as long as the thrust is on specialty crops, either in general or on a more specific level, like promoting Vermont honey to new markets or Vermont maple to new markets. And then finally, a farm requests funds to purchase equipment to expand production capacity. Again, that would be ineligible. That would benefit just one producer and would be more of a business development grant. Just a couple more examples, because sometimes this can be hard to wrap your head around. A company requests funds to promote its brand of specialty crops. So Joe Maple's maple candy. No, that is much too specific. But if a grower requested funds to establish a new cooperative that would help other specialty crop producers diversify their operations and meet market demand, absolutely. That sort of thing would be eligible. A cooperative, even if it's led by one individual grower, if it's establishing a new cooperative and working with other specialty crop producers, that can absolutely be covered. There is also a group requests funds to launch a promotional campaign to increase brand awareness of Vermont grown. So this is a little tricky. Technically, that is ineligible unless matching funds are used to ensure specialty crop plot grant funds will enhance competitiveness of specialty crops specifically. So the problem with Vermont grown is that it could potentially cover non-specialty crops. It could cover Vermont grown feed corn. But if you identify how much of that market, how much of the market that you're hoping to increase promotion toward is a non-specialty crop, say it's 20%, as long as your matching funds cover that, that would be eligible. So find that balance. If you have any questions about that, again, you can reach out directly to me. This is a lot simpler to tackle than it seems on the surface, but we just want to make sure that everything is on the up and up with the USDA. And then finally, sort of in comparison to that, a group requests funds to launch a promotional campaign to increase sales of Vermont grown pumpkins. Absolutely. Because it's specifically pumpkins, it could be specifically squash, it could be specifically cherries, it could be honey, it could be cut flowers. As long as it's a specific specialty crop that is eligible without having to do any workarounds with the matching funds. You can also go to our website and see a history of prior projects under program history, and that can give you a good idea of what sort of projects have been funded in the past and might help you figure out what you want to do for your project. So Vermont does have a list of state funding priorities. These haven't changed a lot over the years, but we do have a new one this year. So just going to touch on these. We worked in partnership with statewide specialty crop stakeholders to identify these funding priorities. They're not ranked, so any of these have the same amount of value or interest to Vermont as any of the others. Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets does have flexibility from USDA on how to allocate funding, so we generated this list so that we can focus our priorities specifically on the things that Vermont and Vermont growers are worried about. The ultimate goal of this program is to address local needs, so projects should address issues facing specialty crop businesses and organizations that fall under these funding priorities. Applicants will need to select at least one funding priority whenever they're going through their application. You're encouraged to focus on just one, but if you want to select more than one, that's fine. You'll hear me say as I go through this application, there's a lot of opportunities to list multiple things like funding priorities, multiple project goals and outcomes. I really encourage you to focus in on one, maybe two, and make it really count. It's just going to be a lot easier for you to track down the line. And then also, in addition to these state funding priorities, projects must also address one or more of the priority strategies, strategic goals, objectives, or recommendations for strengthening Vermont's food system identified in the Vermont Agriculture and Food System Strategic Plan 2021 to 2023. And that's a link that is included in the application process. But you'll have to select at least one brief that your project addresses. So I'm not going to read through these state funding priorities, but I will note that we've removed, in previous years, we've had a COVID-19 recovery priority that has been removed and replaced with climate resilience and adaptation. We have split this off from that first funding priority about innovative production practices to enhance farm viability and natural resource conservation. Originally, that did have a mention toward climate, but with particularly the weather the last year and increasing challenges related to climate and climate change, we have added climate resilience and adaptation as a funding priority. So if your project focuses specifically on climate resilience, adaptation, mitigation, that would be fully within the funding priorities for the state. And then here's the fun USDA part of this application process. The USDA will use standardized metrics to evaluate grant program impact and report that performance to the Office of the Office of Management and Budget and Congress. Each funded proposal must include at least one of the 7 specified outcome measures, which I'll go over in this next slide, but will also be covered in the application and in the RFA, and at least one indicator that gives a quantifiable result. This will allow AMS to aggregate the data and to assess the overall impact of the program and report to Congress and the Budget Office on national outcome measures. So essentially, these outcome measures are aligned across all the states so that the USDA can look at it on whole and say, how did we do? So those outcome measures are here. All of these outcome measures address enhancing the competitiveness of specialty crops. And if you've applied in the past, but not since 2022, they actually have recently announced, well, in 2022, it's not so recently anymore, revised outcomes and indicators. So ideally, the goal of these new measures were that they're more feasible to accomplish and measure within a grant's period of performance. They're better aligned with grant program purpose and recipient activities, so what people are actually doing, and more reflective of work performed during the project. So those outcome measures include 7 sort of overarching categories that then can break down into individual sort of sub-indicators. So one is increasing the consumption and consumer purchasing of specialty crops. This is really a marketing focused one. It could be toward increasing access to specialty crops and expanding specialty crop production and distribution. It could be increasing food safety knowledge and processes, whether that's for consumers or for producers. It could be improving pest and disease control processes. It could be developing new seed varieties and specialty crops. It could be expanding specialty crop research and development, and it could also include improving the environmental sustainability of specialty crops. So again, one of those focuses not necessarily on just climate change, but climate resilience, less pesticide use, generally making it more sustainable to produce and distribute specialty crops. To go a little bit more into outcome number 1, which is a little bit more nebulous in a way. So if your project focuses on marketing and promotion and consumer education and access, number 1 could be a really good fit for you. It used to be in prior years, marketing and promotion projects needed to track sales by dollars and percent changes, and now they are not required to track sales. And if they do, they can track by a combination of volume and average price instead. So here you can see if you're doing a project to increase consumption and consumer purchasing of specialty crops, you have a number of indicators to choose from. One might be the total number of consumers who gained knowledge about specialty crops. So that could be people who attended your workshop or your webinar, or people who came through your storefront, your organization's storefront in the last year. Total number of consumers who consumed more specialty crops is again something where you can track maybe through a farmers market survey or through customer metrics for distribution. Number of additional specialty crop customers counted and number of additional business transactions executed. Again, more of an increase in sales and increase in engagement to track there. And you can also measure increased sales. So if you're an organization working with multiple producers who are trying to increase the sale of their particular specialty crop, you can ask them to report on the amount of sales for their specialty crop for the program and after. I know it's a little complicated. Sometimes it's easier to talk this through. So if you are having trouble with selecting an outcome measure or generally just identifying which sub-indicator you would be interested in using, you can talk to me and we can go through it. I like to sit there with it and kind of look through all the options and see what fits best. Again, at a minimum, your project needs one outcome and then one indicator. So the outcome is that overarching category at the top, and then the indicators are the actual items that you can track. You don't need to track more than one, and it's not going to make your application more competitive to track more than one. So don't track or measure more than what you can reasonably do, and choose what best represents the outcome of your projects. Some outcomes might have a small number. So, for example, we saw back before developing new seed varieties and specialty crops. The outcome for that could be that you aim to develop one new seed variety. That's totally fine. It could be that you develop 2 new processes for increasing access to specialty crops. That's totally fine. New innovations typically only come in 1s or 2s. It doesn't have to be a large number to be an effective outcome measure. Okay, then you will also be asked to include an estimated project budget. And so it breaks down into personnel, fringe benefits, travel, equipment, supplies, contractual, and other. Generally speaking, the federal government defines equipment as something more than $5,000 in value. So even though it's confusing, most things that you request, so if you're looking for, even if it's a printer or an individual piece of equipment, that would fall under supplies. Equipment generally means something specialized. If you're thinking a project needs equipment to be successful, you're going to want to check the allowable costs and activities section of the RFA. We can also talk through it with you. We've been able to fund a number of special equipment, be it a new labeler for maple syrup bottles, a press for making nut oils, and we've also done a drone for pesticide applications. So there's a lot of options there, but we do just want to walk through it and make sure that it makes sense. Again, you're going to be asked to list your matching funds and the match source, and then through the application process, we'll ask for more details. So you're going to have to include who this personnel is that is receiving these salaries and wages, what the travel budget covers, that sort of thing. And then here we go, how to apply. So you're going to need to submit your pre-application by Sunday, January 14th, 2024 at 11:59 p.m. There is no buffer in web grants. You cannot submit at 12 a.m. on Monday, January 15th. You're also not required to wait until Sunday to prepare your application or even submit it. And since that deadline is a Sunday, we are not available on the weekend, so please plan accordingly. We'll be available that Friday before, but we will not be available on the weekend to assist with technical issues, etc. So really go ahead, get your web grants account set up. We're gonna go over that in a second, and get your application stuff ready to go before the 14th. I've had enough experiences in my life of an essay due at 9 a.m. that gets in right under the wire that I just encourage you to not put yourself in that position. What you'll need includes a summary of your project and estimated timeline. So that summary doesn't have to be hyper in-depth, but it does need to include the specific issue, problem, or need, the objectives that you hope to achieve, and your project's impact on the specialty crop industry. You'll want to explain who benefits from your project and describe an outreach plan to reach them. You'll want to describe the specialty crop stakeholders who support your project and explain why. This is really a critical component, and it can be easy to leave it off, but that would be why I encourage you to start doing this sort of outreach now if you haven't already. It's important that the applicant has identified who your stakeholders are and indicate whether or not you have spoken to them about the project and earned their support. and show support from other businesses and organizations. Letters of support are not required at the pre-application stage, and one will be required at the full application stage. So this doesn't need to be a formal form of support, but it does need to have happened, and you need evidence that you've gone through these steps. You'll want to choose at least one outcome measure, but indicators aren't required until the full application stage, so you'll just need that overall outcome, one of those 7. You'll want to describe your monitoring and evaluation plan, and provide an estimated budget, including matching funds. It can be an estimate, but you can't request more in the full application. So during the pre-application, if you tell us your budget is $30,000, and it's an estimate, if you're invited back for a full application, you can only request up to $30,000. If it's less, that's fine, but ideally, it would be around the same. A quick timeline. So we are here in December 12th for the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program Information Session webinar, and then the deadline is January 14th. Around February 2nd, pre-applicants will be notified of the invitation to submit a full application. So we will have a team of reviewers who will be scoring and reviewing all pre-applications. And then on the 2nd, we will let folks know if they have been selected to submit a full application. And then the deadline for submitting a full application, which includes an entire project profile set by the USDA, will be March 20th. In April, we'll notify applicants of funding decisions, and then we have to get our plan to the USDA on May 1st. Usually in August or September, grantees are notified of AMS decisions. There may be adjustments during this process, which would be something we would work with applicants on. And then in October, the USDA announces final awards. So this is a long process, and it won't be until really this time next year that you're getting up and running on a project. But it is something you have plenty of time to plan for. And the last thing I want to do is just do a quick web grants tutorial. So Web Grants is the system that the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets Agricultural Development Division uses to cover our grant management. So you can get to it by going to agriculturegrants.vermont.gov. It can also be accessed on our website, and you'll need an account and need to submit your application through this process. We do not have a email or paper process for applications. So if you do not have a Web Grants account yet, you'll head over to that agriculturegrants.vermont.gov that I mentioned earlier, and you will go down to click here to register. This is what the front page looks like, more or less, and then you'll fill out that application. It'll take 1 to 2 days for the registration to be approved, and only after it's approved can you start and submit an application. So again, please register for Web Grants as soon as possible. It is just simpler that way. And you'll have plenty of time to get to know the system before you need to submit your application. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And I'm going to pull up our Web Grant system. And I'm going to share this with you so that you can see the process. I'm going to sign in as our handy dandy test account. And once you're signed in, you'll go over here to the left to funding opportunities, and you will look for this 2024 Specialty Crop Block Grant Program link. You'll click on this, and then you'll see some of the information. You'll have access to the RFA as well as key links that you might need during your application process. And then what you'll want to do is hit Start New Application. You'll be able to select a title, a contact, and then essentially, as you go through this process, this is kind of an application wizard, like it says up here, that will guide you through the process of actually creating this application. And then once you get here, you'll be able to select the various application forms that you need to fill out. All of these will need to be filled out and marked as complete in the system in order for you to submit. So it's Relatively straightforward, but I understand that it can be a little bit confusing. So if you have any questions about web grants or you run into any technical issues, please let me know and we can try and get you through it. Okay, I'm just gonna quickly finish up this slideshow. Okay, so if you need any technical assistance in developing this grant and writing this grant, we encourage you to reach out to these following um, resources. There is a business planning and assistance directory on our website, as well as a document of grant writing consultants. You can also go to the Rural Economic Development Initiative program through VHCB, Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, in order to find assistance with writing this grant. VHCB really targets businesses and organizations in small towns and rural areas of the state, whereas the other two cover pretty much across the board. And so that's all I have for this webinar. Please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out at agr.specialtycrops@vermont.gov. You can also give me a call. And I'm happy to walk you through any questions that you might have about this process. Again, this is a great opportunity for organizations, nonprofits, producer associations, even growers who are interested in researching a new process or a new cultivar, whatever it is. We're really excited to see your applications and happy to answer any questions that you have. I'm going to stop sharing.